Dr. Taylor Marshall, I want to welcome you here to God, Country, and the American Story on the Washington Times. A lot to talk about today. You have a new book, Christian Patriot, 12 Ways to Create One Nation Under God. And I love this title. I love what you're trying to accomplish here. We have a lot to get into here because one of the big debates that we've had in American culture, and I think it's a fascinating debate, is that, well, we've never been one nation under God. We've never been a Christian country. That's not who we are. Why would we want to go back to something that never existed? When you hear a critique like that, how do you respond to it?
Well, I went to public high school, and I think the problem with that question is it presumes that history, Christianity, government, politics begins in 1776. And in the book, I do look at the founding fathers and many of the quotes regarding Christianity and the founding of our country, especially when you look at the 13 colonies. If you just focus on the establishment of the United States, it is a little bit more difficult to say, oh, this is a Christian country. But when you actually look at the colonies and the original states, many of the states, and I document this in the book, require people who hold office to believe in the Trinity, to affirm the Old and New Testament. There's some pretty explicit language for creedal belief in Christianity. But one of the things I'm trying to challenge people, in this sort of, we're moving into kind of a post-MAGA, people are a little bit disillusioned where things going in the conservative realm is, what are we conserving? And is it just something that's fiscal? Is it just something that has to do with foreign policy? Or is it who we are as a people? And one of the things I point out in the book is if you say to someone, well, do you believe Israel should have Jewish customs and norms and laws? Yes. Muslim countries, should they have Islamic customs and rules and laws? Yes. Okay. Should a Christian majority country have Christian norms, Christian society, Christian culture? They'll say, no, you can't do that. That's fascist. You can't. Christianity, for some reason in the modern world, that can't, if it's a majority, that can't be the norm. And if you look at history back before 1776, going back to the early church, to 300s, 800s, 1200s, you do see more of an integration. And the reason for that is going back to Socrates and Plato and Aristotle and, Christian theologians in the early church, and even in our own founding with John Adams in 1776, they state that a country, a nation, is an assembly of families. This is explicit in all their language, that a nation is an assembly of families, and families are rooted in the bond between a man and woman in wedlock, matrimony, marriage. And so if that's the case, and you come to my house and I'm Catholic, and you're like, you see us, there's a crucifix on the wall, we make the sign of the cross, we pray, and you say, that offends me, don't do that, you can't do that. I'll say, well, you're in my home. This is my family. This is what we do. This is our culture. These are our norms. I'm not imposing it. I'm not going to force you to be baptized or force you to read the Bible or, pray with us. But that is our culture as a family. And then, so when you extrapolate that and you think about what Socrates and Plato and Aristotle and the Old Testament and the New Testament, the nation, the country is an assembly of those families. And so if that is the culture of the family, that should be part of the national culture. And again, we're not talking about coercing people into faith, but we are talking about what is the identity and how do we understand things like matrimony, the family, parental rights, foreign policy. All of this should be rooted in the Christian ethos. And that is what America was, maybe not, completely, exhaustively, but we need to get back to that. And I think, especially when it comes to defining the family and marriage and man and woman, we're kind of at the precipice here. We're about to lose it all, because if you redefine sexuality and you redefine marriage and you redefine family and you redefine male and you redefine female, you are attacking that building block. Like, you could think about it as like the Lego that builds the thing. If you're destroying the building block of the nation, you will lose the nation. And that's why secularists and Marxists and atheists attack marriage, and attack family. Because if you can redefine that basic building block, you're going to redefine the entire society.
I have to ask you this because that's actually where I want to go now, because this idea of a new secular religion, when you say, well, we're not going to have any religion, we can't have anything, right? We can't have any laws that reflect any sort of religious ideal. It's almost an absurd claim because you're going to end up having some system, right? Some ideology is going to drive you. If you're saying it can't be Christianity, well, it's going to be something else. And the issues you just brought up, not only have people attacked those issues, if people don't get on board, it's the very same thing people are worried about with Christianity. If you don't get on board with the new quote unquote gender norms, you'll be canceled. People will go after you. The government will even go after you in some cases, depending. We've seen plenty of these instances of bakers and others who are fined for not making same-sex wedding cakes. So you end up with this other secular religion, do you not? I mean, some system wins out.
Yeah, in the book, I talk about how after World War I and World War II, Europe, United States, the Western world, that generation was like, we don't want another world war of complete devastation, entire cities leveled, sons from almost every family killed, destroyed. And so the idea was there was this false deal that happened. And I document this in the book. Basically, after the Second World War is, hey, we don't want this to happen again. So anyone who has very strong beliefs about anything, and that goes for Christianity, we need you to closet that. Be Christian, believe whatever you want to believe, but do not come into the public space, do not come into the public square and talk about these strong, firm beliefs. And that's the deal. And so people are like, okay, well, we're going to be reasonable about this, right? Like, we're going to all be gentlemen here, and we're going to have this neutral vacuum of no ideology, no strong beliefs in the public square. We're all going to be fair on that. And everyone's like, yeah, and they shake hands. We're all going to be reasonable. And as soon as we do that in the 1950s, it's been going on for a long time, but that really gets the snowball rolling and it starts growing. And there's, in the book, I just name it the new secular religion. And you kind of tapped in on that. They say they're not a religion, but they have their own clergy. They have their own their holy days. They have their own parades. They have their own icon, their flags, their ideology. They come into the universities, into the libraries, into the public school system. And as you just mentioned, Billy, they have a system of an inquisition. And there is a set of dogmas that have now been set in this vacuum where we're all going to be neutral and all be reasonable. There is a set of dogmas that if you question, attack, or deny those dogmas, you can be, it's now called canceled, but that's really just a form of excommunication. They can go after your life. They can imprison you. They can make your life miserable. They can debank you. They can kick you off social media. In some countries, they can even kill you. So we have this new secular religion that is developed. Again, they have their own holy days. They have their own clergy. They have their own everything. They're nonprofits. And since the 1950s, especially into the 1960s, this new secular religion has taken over the public space. And like you said, they say, oh, we're not a religion. We're neutral. Y'all are the religious people. We're not religious. But in fact, they act much more like an inquisition than anything you've seen in Christianity. They actually do coerce people. They do try to control your speech, your mind, your behavior. So they are very dogmatic. And in the book, Christian Patriot, I'm trying to help Christians see that we are up against a world religion. They say they're not a religion, but we're up against a world religion that seeks to persecute us and seeks to undermine marriage, family, Christianity, and by extension, society, logos, order, rational order. So all that's under attack. So in the first part of the book, I look at sort of a Christian theology of politics and ethics. And then I say, here's the problem. We have this new secular religion that has taken over the public space. That's really, it's in the Democrats, it's in the Republicans, it's in the European political parties. And then how do we confront that? And so the second half of the book is 12 steps, 12 things that Christians can do to retake, and I'll use the word here, our dominance. our strength that we've held for centuries. And that was good. I mean, the hospitals, the orphanages, medical systems, the university, public education, schools, all these things were brought about by Christianity because they go back to basic teachings from the Sermon on the Mount of how we treat people, human dignity, the common good, helping people, caring for the poor. All of this was produced by Christianity. We're losing that because we have stepped back since the 1950s. And so we see this new secular religion coming after us, growing and coming after us.
There would essentially be, and push back if you think I'm wrong, because maybe there's some other way it would have happened. But when I look at the history of how this nation was formed, and you mentioned going back to the colonies, there would be no America without Christianity. It was the Judeo-Christian ethic was the underpinning of everything you just mentioned, the universities, right? Nonprofits, all the things that make America truly unique, they seem to have come from either direct, Judeo-Christian values and organizations, or at least a benefit of those values on helping shape all of those sentiments. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I mean, Christian values, America is this new project, right? We have the New World. You have all these different European nations, kingdoms, kind of carving out the New World, and everything is sort of a restart. And the United States of America is, a lot of things happened in the 1500s. You had the Protestant Reformation, you have the French Revolution in the 1700s, which is affecting us. But it's kind of that it's in the air. It's what is breathed in the context of the 1700s and especially in the 1800s. It wasn't just in 1776. There's continued to be development of what is law, what is order, what is guilt, juries, judges. All of this comes from the realm of the Bible and Christian tradition. Did not come from Islam. It did not come from the Talmud. It did not come from Buddhism or Hinduism. It came from this worldview that is based on, the golden rule of Jesus Christ, the New Testament, mercy, love, care for the poor, for the underprivileged, and justice and natural law. In the Declaration of Independence, it quotes, it refers to God. It refers to natural law. If you deny God, you deny the Declaration of Independence. You deny our founding. You can't say, I deny God. And the language used in the Declaration it echoes from sacred scripture, from the New Testament. And I show all those references. If you deny the New Testament, you deny God, you deny natural law, you deny the Declaration of Independence, you deny America. So you can't be a new secular religionist and say, I deny all that about Christianity and I love America, I'm pro-America, I believe in America. No, you actually just attacked the root, the foundation of who we are. And we Christians need to be bold in that. We need to say, no, this is what it is. This is what it was. This is what it is. You do not have a right to live upon this thing like a parasite. That's really what they're doing. They're coming in and they're feeding off a healthy body and they're draining it and they're trying to redefine it. And we have to say, no, we're not going to allow that.
Well, and I think, and we're not going to get into this fully here. We could talk about it if you want, but a little bit. But I think the fact is you have this political temporal situation, right, that we're talking about. The idea that you have this new secular sort of, it's a form of atheism, or it's a form of really self-religion, of worship of the self. It generally, that's how it manifests itself. But when you look at that and you look at where we are right now, it's remarkable to me because I'll often think, well, as a Christian, I read the Bible. I know Ephesians 6 tells us we're in a battle between good and evil. And there's a spiritual element to this. That's my point, that is going on, that, we have to solve it in the temporal, but also recognize, and this may sound foreign to people who are not Christians or don't understand theology, that there is a spiritual underpinning that drives a lot of this, right? A lot of this is a quest to take down Christianity, whether or not people realize they're engaging in that or not. And so that complicates this discussion in some ways, because we have to understand that part of it to fully grasp, I think, what is actually happening in our culture, in our society, in our government even. I don't know if you want to comment on that at all.
Yeah, you're right. I mean, St. Paul says, ultimately our enemies are not flesh and blood. They're not other people. Christ died for all men. Our enemies are these spiritual principalities, these demonic entities who want to see the suffering of mankind and mankind's estrangement from God. And Christ came to bring reconciliation and to bring us back into a relationship with God. And so there is this spiritual element there. And that's part of the 12 steps. It's not just like get more politically active. The first step in Christian Patriot is you yourself must be converted. You must carry your cross. Like you can talk politics all day, but if the love of God, if grace is not in your heart, you're not activated. You're not on the team. Like the goal is for people to be true disciples of Jesus Christ. That creates Christian families that are built on love, where the husband represents Christ and the wife represents the church. And that love is life-giving, it's procreative, children are born. The parents are not going to be perfect, right? We believe in forgiveness. But they raise a family, they nurture the family, they educate the family in these principles, and then that just continues to grow. Be fruitful and multiply. That is the principle of creating. I mean, the word nation comes from the Latin word natus, to be born. And patriotism comes from patria, fatherland. So everything here is genetic, it's family rooted. Of course, we refer to God as Father, God our Father. So we really knew that spiritual battle begins first in the soul, right? The spiritual battle begins in the heart. And do you love God with your heart, mind, soul, and strength? And do you pursue righteousness and pursue grace and goodness? That I'm glad you brought that up, Billy, because it is chiefly a spiritual reality. And the overflow of that is the common good. If people are living like that, the overflow is your neighborhood will be better. Your state will be better. Your nation will be better. And ultimately, the world will be better.
No, I love that. And that's sort of the centerpiece of where we start, and then engaging in a way that helps us get back to the roots of who we are. I mean, look, this country is about to celebrate 250 years. And as we inch toward that, I think what better time to be assessing where we are and how we need to sort of fix things to get back on track. I want to talk to you about a couple of other things here. One of them you were hinting at the beginning of this when we were talking about not compelling somebody. You can have values and laws that are reflective of the Christian faith without compelling them. This conversation about the separation of church and state, which obviously this terminology comes from a letter that Thomas Jefferson wrote, and there's a lot of confusion about the separation of church and state. I know you deal with this in the book. How can you help people understand? Because it will often be brought up, well, you can't do that, separation of church and state. And a lot of times the examples are terrible examples. And it's like, no, you can do that actually. So talk about where people go wrong on that issue.
As Americans, and especially if you went to public school, like it has just been browbeaten into you, separation of church and state. I mean, people can't cite amendments or the Declaration of the Constitution, but they all know that one. Your high school civics teacher made sure that you knew that one, separation of church and state. You may not know any other amendments or anything like that, but you know that. And it's not actually there, right? As you said, it comes from Thomas Jefferson. It's a letter he wrote to a group of Baptists. And I think we need to rethink that. And the best analogy or truth that I think you can share with someone is to say, okay, I'm Taylor Marshall. I'm a Christian. I'm an American citizen. I cannot draw a line through me spiritually or physically and say, okay, this is the Christian and this is the citizen. This is the Christian. There's Christian Taylor Marshall and American Taylor Marshall. And I need to somehow flip the switch back and forth throughout my whole life as I navigate this reality of being in the church and being in the state. I am always in the church and I'm always an American unless I renounce it. And I'm always in the church unless I renounce it. Right. So that reality of me being a member of the church and the state cannot be divisible. And so if you take that and you think of every single Christian American or politician, there is no separation of church and state within us. Right. The way everyone knows, the way you vote and the way you work in your HOA and your school district all relates back to your core beliefs.
Yeah.
No one can really say, well, now I'm walking into the halls of Congress, and so I turn off Christianity and I go into American citizen. And so when you think about how you can't divide that in a person, and if persons and families are the building blocks of the nation, you really can't divide it. And Jefferson, I mean, he was a rationalist. He composed this thing called the Jefferson Bible, where he went through and line item vetoed things that Jesus taught that were in the New Testament that he thought should not be there. And that gives an insight into the way Thomas Jefferson understands Christ and Christianity. He actually believes you can bring a black Sharpie to the Bible and just
it's pretty shocking. Most people don't realize that. Yeah.
I mean, if Thomas Jefferson were alive today, Christians would be like, we can't stand this guy. He's horrible. Right? When you look 100%. At what he actually taught and believed, and in his own personal life as well, you're like, this guy, I mean, the conservative would be like, this guy's way worse than Nancy Pelosi or Barack Obama or whatever, right? Like Thomas Jefferson was a radical liberal who had very radical ideas about Christianity and who Christ was and was not, and felt that he could just take a black Sharpie and line item veto the New Testament. And so his ideology and his thinking is not probably the one we want to go with as Christians. He would not be a card carrying Christian in 2025 for sure. He would be on the other side of the aisle. And so that we're going to enshrine this and gild this and make this a dogma of politics moving forward until the end of time. It's a mistake. It's a mistake. And that gets people really scared because they're like, well, now we're going to have these Christian kings chopping off people's heads and Inquisition. And not necessarily. I mean, there are unfortunate, bad, sinful, evil events in Christian politics in the history. But if you look at Christian history in most nations, kingdoms, republics, there is a lack of enforcement and coercion. Again, there are episodes, but if you compare it to Stalinist Russia or Muslim countries or other examples throughout the world.
Look at the Middle East right now.
Yeah,
right now.
Look at all of history. You get to pick one to live in, whether you're a Christian or not Christian. You're like, I want to live in one of those Christian ones. And so we can have just as we're integrated as a citizen and as a Christian, we can have an integration there. And it doesn't necessarily mean that heads are going to be chopped or people are going to go to prison or someone's going to, hold a weapon to your head and say, you have to go to church this Sunday or else. That's not the case.
Okay. Final big question for you, and then we'll close out on the book. But, Christian nationalism, this has been something that has been brought up. I know you deal with it in the book again and again and again. And I think it has become, in some quarters, a legitimate conversation, in other quarters, a boogeyman. What is your take on this conversation about Christian nationalism in America?
Well, that's one reason I wrote this book, because I became aware of it and was studying Christian nationalism. I'm like, there's something good here. They're saying the right things. We have to go back to God. We need to go back to a Christian nation. But, I'm coming from a Catholic point of view. My specialty is St. Thomas Aquinas. He was a medieval philosopher, theologian in the 1200s, wrote a lot about, human nature and politics and whatnot. And as I studied it, Thomas Aquinas understands our political dimension as people under the virtue of patriotism. He actually uses the word patriotism. He says it's under justice. And patriotism is loving your patria, your fatherland. And it's related to the Latin word pater, meaning father. So there's this dimension of honor your father and mother built into patriotism. So Thomas Aquinas understands it as, again, a family unit situation. The word nationalism, Christian nationalism, I discovered nationalism actually becomes popular linguistically at the French Revolution. It's based on the idea in Latin, natus, to be born. And so when you think of that, it's a little bit more of a secular understanding. To be born into a country is nationalism. Okay, I mean, being born is not that hard, right? It's hard, but you didn't really have much say to it. Patriotism is a choice. It's a decision. It's a lifestyle where you are honoring and respecting your fatherland, which you inherited, you received from your father. And it's rooted in God as Father, right? The family, the father structure, all of that. And so that's why the book is not called Christian nationalism. It's called Christian patriotism, because I want to root it back into the virtue. We're talking about virtue ethics here, not just being born. And so I think the tradition of Thomas Aquinas and the Catholic Church actually has a much stronger, more compelling understanding of politics as it relates to the Christian than sort of the newer, and I'll use the term Johnny come lately, Christian nationalism, which is kind of actually drawing on some subversive philosophical tradition from the French Revolution. And so I think if we can maybe shift and focus more on the virtue ethic of Christian patriotism, I think it'll make us better people. It'll make our families better. It'll make the nation better.
Do you think a lot of people on the left will use the Christian nationalism warning to try to scare people that the Christians are going to take over, and there's so many people out there, and there's all these white racists who are part of this, Christian nationalist movement, and it's so dangerous. What is your thought on the use of this term as a political tool? Is there any legitimacy to that? Is there this massive group of people that are trying to take over? Is it a small group? What is your take on that?
Yeah, I mean, obviously nationalism easily, is transposed and sort of dog whistled as Nazi, right? And I think that's another loaded problem with the term. There's a bunch of people that want to make the country Christian. I want to say, yes, let's build the ranks. That is what we want to do. I mean, you read the book of Revelation, it talks about every tribe, tongue, and nation. Like there is this idea of a universal reconciliation of mankind towards God. And by saying every tribe, tongue, and nation, there's a political dimension to that. Christians have never denied that. The idea that Christians are Quakers or that they go off into their closet and they never talk about Jesus Christ or the 10 Commandments or the Beatitudes in public and lead their life and their businesses and their families, it's absolutely absurd. So, yes, and I would love it if the new secular religious people, these Marxists, were afraid that we were joining up and, bringing about this Christian culture. Because guess what? They're doing it every single day. They're just smug and say, well, we're not a religion. Right. Who cares? You're at war with us. Let's go.
Well, and here's what I would say. I mean, look, I'm an evangelical, right? So you're a Catholic, I'm an evangelical. I've been to tons of churches around the country. You have too, I'm sure. And I have never encountered the types of people. I know they exist. They're out there in some small pocket that these people are talking about, right? They don't exist. There are Christians who want to do what you're talking about. There are Christians who want to do what I'm talking about. You want to bring values back. And my personal belief is that a lot of this Christian nationalism talk is their fear of, oh my goodness, they might actually have a solid point, right? Oh my goodness, they might actually win on the political realm this battle. And so they sort of come up with this boogeyman and invent things that are not necessarily happening or are any sort of threat at all. I'll give you the final word on that.
Yeah, I agree with you. I honestly don't think that I've met many of these people or even seen it as a organized movement. And that's kind of what I wanted to get ahead of it and put this book out, Christian Patriot, because I think the Christian nationalist term, tag, label is not helpful. Patriotism is a virtue. Patriotism is honored in our society, and patriotism